I really appreciate that. And I want to thank you, Leah, very much for agreeing to be a guest on Drops of Inspiration. And over to you. Go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can hear you fine. You're not very clear. I don't know why. You're a little
I
bit.
don't know why either.
Pardon?
I don't know. I know. You mean the image?
Yeah, yeah. It's a little
No,
bit hazy.
I don't know why it's fuzzy either.
Okay, okay. Never mind, we'll manage.
Okay, all right, but just go
You
ahead.
have to clean your lens.
Yes, that's a good
Oh,
idea.
that's a good idea. Let me try that. Is that any better?
It's a little better.
I'll try just one.
Because you have the flame there, and that's what's taking away from the image. It's moving.
Is that better?
It's better than it was.
Okay.
Okay, so it might be much light from, it might be the light from the other side. Might be too much light from the side. Anyway, it is what it is. This is just what someone put up in the chat. Okay. First of all, I thank Rosalind for introducing me to you, and I thank you, Leah, for being a guest on Drops of Inspiration. We're very happy to have you here and to have you share your story with us. So over to you.
Okay, thank you. So, you know, it's been said that everyone has a story. Probably like many of you, if you'd been asked as a young girl to write a script for your life, at least for me, it would have read much differently than the way my life is today. Many people have asked me, how did I, as a Baptist and a country girl raised in the middle of the Oklahoma Bible Belt, become an observant Jew? Well, it's a long story with many twists and turns, but in hopes it may help someone else, here's my story. So to begin with, I was raised on a farm in Midwestern Oklahoma. On that farm, we had lots of cows, chickens, pigs, horses, cats, dogs, a few other stray animals. And my father farmed several hundred acres of wheat and cotton. So the farm was a big part of my life. But even bigger than the farm was the church. The church was very important to us. It was a very big part of our lives. My family was very active in the church. My great-grandfather was a Baptist minister. And the church taught a lot of good things about the importance of a relationship with God. And they taught good morals. But one of their key teachings was the fact that, or not the fact, but they taught that if one did not have a relationship with JC, then when they died, they would burn in hell forever and ever. And that was a very scary thought to me, very haunting thought. And it was something that was etched on my inner core for a very long time. So this is the way I was raised when I grew up. I lived in a small Midwestern town in Oklahoma. I went through elementary school, junior high, high school, college, all in that same town. Then when I quit, or when I graduated, then I went to work at the local 3M company in personnel. But at the age of 25, I realized that if I ever had any hopes of getting married, I was probably going to have to move to a bigger city than Weatherford, Oklahoma. So as hard as it was, I quit my job and moved to a bigger city, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. I took a job in the investments department at a bank there. But one of my main priorities when I moved there was to find a good church home. So I ended up joining this huge Baptist church in Oklahoma City called Counselor Baptist Church. And they had a very big singles group there, very active singles group. And so I really liked it. And I dated a few young men while I was there, but none of them really seemed to be the one until one fateful evening, I was asked to take brownies to the home of Chuck Cajetta. Now, in this church, they had something going on every night of the week. For example, Monday night would be a men's Bible study, and Tuesday night would be a women's Bible study, and Wednesday night would be a couples Bible study. So this particular night, Chuck Cajetta was hosting a men's Bible study, and he had asked for help from some of the women in the singles department to bring refreshments for after the Bible study. So I volunteered to bring some brownies, and I didn't know where Chuck lived. And you have to remember, this was, the days before cell phones and Waze. So I called up my friend Peggy. She happened to be dating Chuck, and I asked for directions to his apartment. So I take my little brownies and I drive over to the apartment complex where Chuck lives. But either I wrote the number down wrong, or Peggy gave me the wrong information. It's probably I wrote the number down wrong, but I went to the wrong apartment. So I go back to my car, and I'm sitting in my car, and I'm thinking, well, maybe I'll see someone that I recognize, and then I'll ask them for directions. So I'm sitting in my car, and then all of a sudden I see this cream-colored Olds 88 car driving right behind me, and it parks about 2 slots down, and I'm sitting there watching, and all of a sudden this handsome, svelte man emerges from the car. And I don't know him, but he's carrying a Bible, so I'm thinking he's probably going to the Bible study. So I hop out of the car really quickly, and I run over and I say, excuse me, are you going to the Bible study? And he goes, mm-hmm. I said, oh, I'm so glad, because, I came here with these brownies, and I was supposed to take him to Chuck's apartment, and then I got lost, and I didn't know where to go, and I was really hoping I'd see someone, and I just didn't know what to do, and then here you are. And he was like, mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, well, he doesn't talk very much. But he shows me, how to get to Chuck's apartment. And before I leave, he turns to me and says, I'm Bob Schiermyer. And I said, oh, it's nice to meet you. I'm Marcella Payne. Well, I'm terribly embarrassed. So I leave the brownies on the counter and make a quick exit. But a couple of days later, the phone rings, and the voice on the other end says, is this that woman that makes those wonderful brownies? And I said, I think so. Who is this? And he says, well, this is Bob Schiermyer. I have your platter, and I want to return it. So he began to introduce himself more, and he began to explain to me that he was in Oklahoma City because he finally decided what he wanted to do with his life. He'd been a pilot for 9 years, and he decided he wanted to go to medical school, but he needed to take a refresher course. And so he was in Oklahoma City taking that course, and he was staying in Chuck's apartment. So we talked for a little bit, and he also explained to me that he was very active in his church back in Kansas, that he was the president of his singles group. And he asked me if I would be willing to go out with him. And I thought, well, he is president of singles group, and he's been a pilot, and he must be a doctor, so he could be pretty interesting. So I agreed to an evening out with him. And I have to admit that I was totally charmed. So much so that I went into my boss the next day at the bank where I worked, and I told him, I met the man last time I'm going to marry. Well, and obviously I did, but before we got married, there was an episode that happened early on in our dating relationship that threatened to end the whole courtship, because we'd only had a few dates, maybe 2 or 3 dates, and he was going to come to my house for dinner one evening. It was on a Friday, and I was so excited he was coming because I thought this could be the one. So I took the day off of work, and I tried to clean my apartment from top to bottom. I even planted fresh flowers out in front so he would be impressed. And I wanted to cook the most sumptuous meal I could think of. So he shows up that evening, and he's sitting on the couch while I'm putting the finishing touches on dinner. And I say, so I ask him, I say, so what have you and Wayne been studying lately? Wayne was his roommate, and they had a lot of interesting Bible studies. And he said, lately we've been studying the Jewish dietary laws, like they don't eat pork and they don't mix meat and dairy. And he said, well, we don't really understand the reason for it, but we think it's probably a pretty good idea to try and follow it. Well, if anyone can guess what I had for dinner that night, it was baked ham. So things didn't go so well. So the next day, we go out to breakfast, and he makes sure that he doesn't order any pork. And then we go for a late lunch, and he makes sure that he doesn't want to mix meat and dairy. And so I'm sitting there eating lunch, and I'm thinking, this is like the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And I ask him during the conversation, I say, why is it that you think you have to keep kosher when you're not Jewish? And he says, I don't know, I just figure it's probably a pretty good idea. And I'm thinking, well, this could really affect your relationship. So after the meal, I asked him he wouldn't mind just going home, and that the weekend had not really gone the way I wanted it to. So he left. And when he left, he looked at me and he said, I just realized this is probably the last time I'll ever see you. And I said, oh, no, silly. No, it won't be. Although I was so upset, I was thinking it just might be. But he calls me back the next week and he apologizes and he says, you know, I don't know what got into me. I don't know why I even said those things. And he apologized to me. He sent me flowers. And I realized that maybe he wasn't such a bad guy after all. And we ended up getting married in November of 1984. And marriage to this man has brought me more excitement and more adventure than I could have ever imagined. So we get married in 1984. Shortly thereafter, my husband Bob is accepted to medical school in Bethesda, Maryland on the East Coast. And we moved to Maryland and he goes to medical school. 11 months after we were married, we were blessed with our first son, a beautiful baby boy. So my husband is busy with medical school and I'm busy being a new mommy. And then approximately 2.5 years later, we were blessed with another son. Then at the end of that third year, my husband was given the option to move to Texas to do his 4th year of medical school, because the 4th year of medical school is not really classroom work, it's all work, you know, in the hospital. So we packed up and we moved to Texas. So the first week we're in Texas, we're in San Antonio. My kids are with my parents and my husband is busy at the base in processing, and I'm sitting in the house, the empty house, the furniture hasn't come yet. I'm sitting in the front room and I'm looking out the window and I'm trying to imagine what it's going to be like living in San Antonio and in our neighborhood. And I'm trying to envision, are there going to be people there my age? Are there going to be any kids the same age as my kids? And I'm looking out the window and all of a sudden I see this dark blue little sports car pull up across the street. And I'm looking out and I'm watching out the window, and this lady gets out of her car and she looks about like the same age as me. And then 2 little kids get out and they look like they're about 3 years old. And I'm thinking, you know, I should go meet her. And then I think that I'm moving and, you know, I probably need to go shower and freshen up before I meet a neighbor. But I thought, you know what, I don't know when I'm going to see her again. I just need to seize the moment. I'm going to run over there. I'm going to introduce myself. So I open up the door. We lived on this kind of on a hill. I run down the steep driveway and I run over and I go, hi, I'm your new neighbor. I'm Marcella. And she goes, oh, I'm Kathy. And just for the record here, I have asked permission from the Rossos to share this information. So, you know, I meet Kathy and she's very nice. And I find out that her husband is also in the Air Force and he's also a doctor. And we hit it off really well from the start. She was very nice. And we became very good friends. And I soon learned that Kathy was not Jewish, but her husband was. So he was not particularly observant at the time, but he was Jewish. So we learned a little bit about Judaism during that time. So we became very good friends with the Rossios, and we knew them for about 3 years. And then after that time, the Rossios were with the Air Force and they were transferred to Dayton, Ohio. So the last day before they left, I remember fixing a meal for them. And then when they left, I told Kathy, I remember hugging her and crying and telling her, I'm going to miss you so badly, not knowing how their lives would play into ours later down the road. Because about 2.5 years later, my husband was transferred to Dayton, Ohio. Now, I didn't know anything about Dayton, Ohio, other than that the Rossios lived there, and I was excited that we knew somebody. So when we got there, we called them and said, you know, we're here in Dayton, can we come see you? And they said, of course. Now, Kathy had told me before they left San Antonio that her husband wanted to become more religious, that he wanted to become more observant. I didn't really know what that meant, but I thought that was a good thing. So they invited us to their house, and when we get there, things had taken a dramatic turn from the way that I used to know them, because they, her husband had become much more observant, and Kathy was getting ready to go through conversion. So when they opened the door, her husband, Rob, who's now known by Rubain, had just gotten home from shul. He was wearing a black hat and tzitzis, as were the sons. And she invited me in, and she was dressed very modestly. And there were pictures of rabbis all over the wall. And they invited us in their house, and they said, oh, this is where we eat our dairy food, and this is where we eat our meat food. And it was just so different to me than how I had known them. And so, but it was really nice, you know, that we were able to at least see them, but it was just a different way than we had known them before. And then we wanted to get together with them when we moved to Ohio, but they said, well, we can come over on Sunday. And we'd be like, well, we can't do Sunday because of church. And we'd say, but how about Saturday? And they said, well, we can't do Saturday. So we didn't see them so much, but still, you know, we were still we would see them a little bit. So it was also at this time in my life, though, that I was in my mid-30s, and I, for myself, felt like it was time for a reevaluation of things in my own life, because I had a good life. I was married. By this time, I had 3 healthy children, 3 healthy sons, and things were good. My husband had a good job. We had a nice house. Just things seemed to be really good. But I felt like spiritually that there was something more that I wanted to tap into. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like that all my life I had done everything I knew to do to be a good Christian. We went to church all the time. I read my Bible. I prayed. I did everything the church taught to be a good Christian, but I still felt like that there was something more that I wanted. I didn't know what it was, but I felt like I wanted to be closer to God. And I remember that one night before I went to sleep, I remember praying and saying, God, I really want to know you. No matter what the cost, please lead me into a deeper relationship with you. And I remember when I prayed those words, I remember thinking, no matter what the cost, I thought, but yeah, I do. I want a relationship with God no matter what the cost. But little did I know what was to follow. Because after I prayed that prayer, I thought, well, if I really mean that, then I should be willing to read my Bible and do whatever it says, even if no one else does it, even if no one else thinks it's an important thing to do, I should do it. So I remember praying for direction as to what I should study. And when you know it, even in both the New Testament, it talks about head coverings. Now, this was an issue that was always very sensitive between my husband and I. And when he would bring it up, I never wanted to talk about it and I didn't like it. But I started reading about it and I began to feel like I should be covering my hair. And so I would go to church, and we had a big church with like 1,000 members, and I would go to church and I would wear a hat, and I feel like I couldn't have been more noticed than if I was like a billboard with neon flashing lights. And I would go there and feel very out of place, but I thought, you know what, I just want a close relationship with God. And I've said I'll do whatever it takes. And I can't even get past this thing of covering my head, but I really struggled with it. And I thought, well, I don't want to draw attention to myself. So what I'll do is I'll wear a scarf and I'll go to church and I'll sit in the very back. And when there's formal prayer, I'll cover my hair. So I did that one night. And after the service was over, one of my friends in the very front of the church yells out to me. She goes, Marcella, I saw you back there in the very back with your scarf on. And then she just dies laughing. Well, I didn't think it was so funny. But anyway, but the issue of head covering soon took a backseat to a much larger looming issue, because a few weeks later, my husband was sent on a business trip with Ruvain Rossio. Now, I think it's interesting he was, chosen to go with him. But anyway, Hashem orchestrates everything. So my husband's going on a business trip back to San Antonio, and they were going together. And Bob said he was really happy that he was chosen to go with Ruvain, because he said that many times when he was sent on business trips, he would have to worry about off-color jokes and inappropriate subjects. And he said, but that was not the case with Ruvain. They usually always talked about topics of religion. Well, this trip was no exception, because on this trip, Ruvain had just been to a seminar with Rabbi Tovia Singer called Let's Get Biblical. Rabbi Tovia Singer is a Kiruv rabbi, and he does seminars to try to bring Jews back to their biblical roots. So he had done this seminar on Let's Get Biblical. And basically it talks about why Jews don't accept JC as Messiah. So on this trip, Ruvain had asked my husband several questions about, why do Christians believe this and why do they believe that? And when they came back from the trip, Bob said, Ruvain had some really good questions that I think deserve answers. And my response was, well, I'm sure Jews have some crafty way to explain why they don't believe in JC. You should just ignore it. And he goes, no, these are really good questions. And it should be pointed out here that my husband was a really serious student of the Bible. He had actually been accepted to go to seminary to become a pastor, but he chose to go to medical school. But he basically had the Bible memorized. Even if you go to him now and you say, I know this is in the Bible, I don't know where it's at, he can tell you the book, the chapter, the verse. He was a very, very serious student. He had a massive library. So when these questions were asked, he said they were really good questions. And he said that, they deserve an answer. In addition to that, Ruvain had asked Bob if he'd be willing to listen to the tape set by Rabbi Tovia Singer, which is basically called Let's Get Biblical. And it deals with several different issues dealing with Christianity and again, why Jews don't accept JC as Messiah. So my husband said, sure, that he would listen to it. because he thought by listening to it, he'd be able to show the credibility of his own beliefs. So he listened to the tape set, which is pretty extensive. And when he was done, he said that he had always had some questions in his mind in Christianity, but he said that he had gone to a pastor and asked him about it. And the pastor said, oh, you know, there's going to be issues there. But he said, just take them and put them in your faith pit. And hopefully eventually in your life, you'll be able to take those out and resolve them. But he said, for now, just put them in your faith pit. Well, Bob said when he listened to those tapes, it was as though he said that all of a sudden, all the loose ends began to come together and all the dots began to connect. And he said he realized he'd had a problem because there was a problem. So when this happened, obviously I wasn't so happy about it because, you know, when you're taught that if you don't believe in JC and you're going to burn in hell forever, this is not a good option to consider. So it was pretty tense in our household for several weeks. And one day, finally, he was gone. My husband was at work and I was the only one at home, and I was cleaning house and I was dusting. I was in his office and I saw the tape set called Let's Get Biblical. I saw the tape set, I saw the workbook, and I thought, what could be such a big deal? I mean, what is really bothering my husband that he's just so, you know, focused on this? So I pick up the workbook and I decide to thumb through it a little bit. And I go to this section that talks about the oneness of God. And Rabbi Singer asked the haunting question. He said, if God wanted the whole world to know that there's only one God and no one else, what would he have had to say? And then he had verse after verse after verse about, I, the Lord your God, am one. There is no other besides me. I'm not a man nor the son of man. There is no savior besides me. And it's like, it was verse after verse. And it was like, I never saw those before. It's like, I was blown away by it. And then it's like, okay, so I thumbed over a little bit more in the workbook, and it was talking about the inerrancy of the New Testament. And I was always taught that if you could find even one mistake in the New Testament, that would call into question the whole credibility. But we were always taught that everything was perfect, that there was no mistakes. And Rabbi Singer had taken the first 4 books of the New Testament and he put them side by side, and he showed blatant discrepancies in the scriptures. And I was like, well, I never saw that before, but I thought, well, I'm sure it can be explained. I just don't know what the answers are. So my husband came home from work, we had a long discussion, and I said, I mean, obviously these are just a few things that put the chink in the armor, but I said, you know, if these things are really bothering us, you need to go to the pastor and you need to talk to him about it and tell him that we need answers and we need to resolve these things. So Bob said, okay, so he makes an appointment with our pastor and he goes to speak with them. And before he got too far in the discussion, the pastor held up his hand and said, Bob, I just have faith that what I believe is true, and that's good enough for me. So that was good enough for him, but that wasn't good enough for us. So my husband was also a Sunday school teacher. He taught young married couples in the church. And so he didn't come right out and tell the whole class that he was studying the workbook, but he happened to ask some of these questions in the class. He would bring them up and he would ask questions, and the members of the class would say, well, wait a minute, you know, that's an important question. What's the answer? And he'd say, well, just go do your research. Well, I mean, then the next week he'd be working in the emergency room and people come to me and say, what was the answer to that question? I'd be like, well, do your research. I didn't know the answers. So after a while, like after several weeks of this, he was actually asked to quit teaching because it was making everyone too uncomfortable. And of course, it was very uncomfortable in the church then because we were kind of known as the couple who was asking the inappropriate questions. So another thing my husband did was he sat down and he wrote like just a small little pamphlet of key issues in Christianity that he thought there were some questions there that needed to be answered, that needed to be resolved. So he writes this book and he gave it to just like 4 or 5 of his closest friends that used to be in his Sunday school class. And he asked them if they would be willing to read it and be willing to discuss it. So many, many weeks went by. There was silence. No one said anything. And then finally, one of the friends called and said that they would like to get together with us and they would like to discuss what he had written. So my husband and I were like so happy because we thought, this is so great. They don't have to agree with that, but hopefully they'll come and we'll talk about it and we'll get things out in the open and we'll have this great discussion and we'll get things resolved. So we were very excited they were at least going to be willing to talk about it. So it was actually in December 1995, in like the middle of December, they made an appointment to come to our house and we were so excited. So the evening comes and, there's a knock at the door and we run to the door. We're so excited that they're there to meet with us. We go to the door and these men look like they had come to pay a shiva call. And they come inside and they sit down at the table. And just a few minutes after they sat down, then the doorbell rang again. And it was our neighbor and friend, Steve. He was also a member of the church and he heard that we were going to have this meeting. He said, oh, that sounds really interesting. So maybe I can come and be a moderator. So he shows up and all the men look at him and they say, what are you doing here? And he's like, well, I heard about it and I thought I'd come be a moderator. And they're like, we didn't ask you to come be a moderator. But anyway, so they all sit down at the kitchen table and I'm kind of standing on the other side of the counter listening. And they sit down and they begin to ask my husband questions about how he feels about JC and about some of the Christian doctrines, and he begins to talk about it. And then one of the men that came to visit, he raises his hand, he says, Bob, he said, you'll know more than we ever do. But with a belief like that, what are you doing being a member of our church? And I'm standing on the other side of the counter with tears streaming down my face. And I walk over and I say, could I just say one thing? I said, if everything you had ever believed in was being called into question, and you were told that you were going to die and burn in hell if you didn't believe like that, wouldn't you want someone to help you? And the leader for the group said, Marcella, the women of the church, they really like you. They really do. But, we're really sorry for this, but this is how it has to be. And they got up and left. Well, that was devastating for me because, they left and I couldn't believe that we were out of the church. This had been my whole life. This had been my identity. And I remember at the time, we were Christians. We had our sparkling Christmas tree. I'm sitting on the couch and I'm crying. And Steve, the friend who showed to be the moderator, he said, Marcella, it's not like it's the end of the world. And for him, it wasn't, but for me, it was. Because this is my whole identity. This is what I've been taught my whole life. This is what I believed in my whole life. This is where all my friends were at. It was just so hard to believe that we've been asked to leave the church. And it's interesting to know that this was in December of 1995. It was also in December of 1995 that the shul that we're currently a member of was founded. And at that time, I didn't even know what a shul was. And then it's as though Hashem provided the cure before the illness. So basically, we were out of the church. And this was a time that was obviously very difficult for me. We quit going to church and it was a very low point in my life. I became very depressed because basically the relationship with my parents was very severely affected. We didn't have holidays together anymore. My children were in private Christian schools and all of a sudden it was difficult for them. How were we going to deal with that? I feel like I lost all my friends. I felt pretty alone. And I felt like I cried a lot. And it got to the point where I didn't want my husband to see me crying all the time. I didn't want my kids to see me crying all the time. So I would go in the bathroom to cry. And I remember, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, but I'm telling this story for a purpose, is that I remember being in the bathroom and just telling God, just let me die, because I don't think I can deal with this. I think my husband can, but I can't, because this is my whole life. This is my whole identity. Just let me die. Well, so as I said, it was a very low point in our lives, but shortly after that time, we were transferred, because we're in the Air Force and military, we were transferred to Oklahoma, back to Oklahoma City. Well, Oklahoma was where my parents were from. And I'd always thought that would be, so nice to be in Oklahoma where my parents would be. And if my husband and I ever wanted to have like a weekend getaway, we'd have babysitters and it would be so nice. But it wasn't quite what I thought it would be, because we moved there and It was very tense with my parents, and obviously they were very concerned for us. They were very concerned for our salvation. They were concerned about our kids, so it was very tense with them. And then, in addition to that, I was having problems, and I had to go to the doctor, and I was diagnosed with bladder cancer. Now, the fact that I prayed to die in the bathroom, and then I was diagnosed with bladder cancer, made me wonder if there wasn't a connection. The doctor told me that he couldn't understand why I was a bladder cancer patient. He said most bladder cancer patients are men, and even if they're women, they're usually in their 60s. And he said that they've usually smoked and they've been exposed to harsh chemicals. Well, I was in my 30s, and I had never smoked, and I grew up on a farm. I wasn't really exposed to chemicals. So he said he couldn't understand why I had it, but I did. So it was kind of a challenging year because we were in Oklahoma. Things were tense with my parents. I had bladder cancer. I began to homeschool. My kids couldn't go to a private Christian school anymore. They couldn't go to, there was no private schools they could go to. The public schools really weren't what we wanted. And so I began to homeschool. That was another big issue for my parents because they were always adamantly opposed to that, and I was homeschooling. So anyway, so it was a very challenging year. And at the end of that year, I began to feel really tired in the afternoon when I was homeschooling, and I would go to take long naps. And then I found out that there was a reason for that because I was pregnant. And I wasn't pregnant with one baby, I was pregnant with two. So that was also another challenge. So I remember feeling just very, very, just not knowing why things were happening the way they were happening. It just seemed like so much was being thrown at me. And I remember standing in front, and I didn't know it was wrong to pray standing in the bathroom. I remember we had this big window in the bathroom. I remember praying every day, God, please keep these babies healthy. Please help them be healthy, because here I have cancer and so many things are going on in my life. But thank God he blessed us with two healthy babies, a boy and a girl, and they were both very, very healthy. And it was such a blessing that he did that for us. So anyway, so like I said, things were very, very challenging, traumatic. But after about a year and a half in Oklahoma, my husband was transferred to Colorado. So we moved to Colorado, and obviously things were busy. My husband again was still working, and I had the twins, and I was still dealing with cancer, and so it was just very, very busy. We were trying to teach our kids something about Amish, but again, we didn't have anyone to teach us. So I don't know how effective we were, but we would have Torah time every Shabbos, and we would reward our kids if they would read the parsha, if they could answer the questions. And that was basically the extent of our teaching and our learning. But then one day, after we've been to Colorado Springs for about a year, we get a call from Rabbi Eisenman in Baltimore, Maryland. It's a long story how we knew him, but basically he had written a book on EO. My husband was really enjoyed that book. He had corresponded with Rabbi Eisenman, and he sort of took us under his wing, and he befriended us. And so he called us in Colorado Springs one evening to see how things were going. My husband explained to him how that, we didn't have a lot of connection. We didn't know where to go from there. And so Rabbi Eisenman said, well, he said that he had a grandson who attended the yeshiva in Denver. And he said that he thought it would be a good idea for us to meet with Rabbi Feldheim there in Denver. So he said he was going to call Rabbi Feldheim and arrange for us to have a meeting with him. So a couple weeks later, we load up all the kids in the van and we drive to Denver and we meet with Rabbi Feldheim. He was really, really nice to us. And at the time, I had all these questions I wanted to ask him, which now that I think back, they seemed like trivial questions, but at the time they were very important to me. And Rabbi Feldheim was so nice. And he answered each question as though it was like the most profound question he'd ever heard. He was really nice to us. He opened up the bookstore. We were able to get some books. We were able to get some music. And it was just a very good meeting. And he also told us about a shul that was closer to us in Colorado Springs. He said it was a Kiruv shul with Rabbi Meyer. And he said he had classes, very many classes during the week. And he recommended that we might want to touch base with Rabbi Meyer. So it was a very helpful meeting. We drive back that evening from Denver, and we had a drought in Colorado. And as we're driving back, there was like just a few little snowflakes on the window, but as we began to drive, they got heavier and heavier. And before we got back to our house, it was so deep that we could barely make it into our driveway, into the garage. And my kids were outside, had their shovels, and they were like screaming in joy that it was snowing. And they're like, there's going to be a snow day tomorrow. And I looked at my husband and said, well, maybe just as our physical drought's coming in, maybe our spiritual drought will be coming to an end. And so it was, because the next week, my husband decided that he wanted to check out Denver. So he drives down there and he goes and he meets with Rabbi Meyer. And Rabbi Meyer said that they don't normally encourage non-Jewish people to come to the shul, but he knew Rabbi Eiselman, and he said that my husband was welcome to come to classes. So he went there, and my husband loved it. They had a Parsha class every Wednesday. He would go to the class, and then he would stay for classes on Wednesday evening. He really, really liked it. So he encouraged me to go. I was still very hesitant to go, but I finally decided that I would go one Shabbos morning. But going to shul, at the time it was a young shul, and they did not have childcare. So I went, and I had my twins with me. They were young, and one would want to sit on my lap, and then the other one would sit on my lap, and then they'd start to cry, and then I had to get up with the diaper bag and the two babies in tow and leave. And it was just very difficult. So I said, you know what? Let's just do the Torah time at home. It's too difficult for me to go to shul. So we continued to do our Torah time at home. But then in 2001, my husband retired from the Air Force, and a decision had to be made about what to do. So initially I'm like, let's just keep everything status quo. Let's just stay here, just take a job at the hospital here in Colorado Springs and continue the way we are. But then I began to think, in the back of our minds, we're considering conversion, but we're not really in a Jewish community. We don't really have anyone to teach us. We go to classes sometimes in Denver, but that was it. And I thought, if we don't make a move, then for the rest of our lives, we're going to be saying, we're thinking about conversion, we're thinking about it, but that would be as far as it goes. And we were told by the rabbis that if you learn and you study and conversion is not for you, that's fine. You can walk away, but you do need to learn. So the decision was made in 2001 that we would move to Denver, we would live in the Jewish community, and we would start to learn and start to take classes. So that's what we did. And about a month after we were in Denver, the Platniks also came on staff there. And so there was one particular week, they'd only been there about a month, that Lori Platnik was teaching a women's class. I really liked her classes. They spoke to me a lot. And I had gone to her class that morning, and class was over, and most of the women were going downstairs to Kiddush. And Lori pulled me aside and she stopped me. She said, oh, Marcella, she said, I heard that you want to get your kids more Jewishly involved. And she said, if that's what you want, then you should be sending your oldest son, Robbie, on the men's mission. She said, it's going to be great. She said, that's a magical place. And I said, well, we thought about it, but he's got a lot of schoolwork and it'd just be too hard to go. And she said, the school should work for you, not the other way around. She said, you just tell them that he's going, that's how it's going to be. And she said, if you want him to be Jewish, that's what you need to do. Or if you don't, then that's another issue. And I started to cry. And she said, okay, come here. We go in the room. And she said, what's going on? I said, there are some things that really appeal to me about Judaism, but there's some things that seem so foreign to me and so overwhelming. I said, I don't know the language when they pray. And I said, in the church, when we prayed, if someone prayed a prayer for 10 minutes, that was considered a long prayer. And here they pray for hours. And I said, I don't understand it. And they're just things that seem foreign to me. And I'm so concerned that if I start learning, then all of a sudden I'll just have this big meltdown and I'll just lose everything. And she said, you know what? She talked to me about the Baal Tshuva vacuum and how you want to go a few steps forward and then you go a few steps back. And she said that you have to take things slowly. And she told me about a friend she had in seminary that wanted to be so religious that she was trying to do everything within 6 months. But she said, and just a few minutes later, she burned out. She said, you have to do it slowly. And she said, you have to have someone teach you and learn with you. And she told me that she would learn with me, which was really nice. So that's what we began to do, is we began to learn every Tuesday and Thursday at my kitchen table. She would come and we would learn. when we first started learning, it was interesting because that was when my son did decide to go to Israel. And she said to me, she said, you know, Marcella, if there's anything you want to ask for, she said, there's it's supposed to be a special segula that, you know, you can write something down, you can write a prayer down and then put it in the wall. And it's supposed to be a special way of, you know, having prayers answered. So I really wanted to be cured of bladder cancer. And so I wrote my note and I gave it to my son and he went on the trip. And when he came back about a week later, I had another urology appointment. Now, at this point, I had had approximately 10 surgeries to have tumors removed. I had been through 2 separate rounds of chemo. And when I would go in to have appointments, they would either tell me again that I had another tumor that needed to be removed, or they'd say something like, well, you know, you don't have any tumors, but you have a lot of inflammation here, and here's where your resection was, and whatever. So I went in that week to have the appointment. And they had sent me to a world-renowned urologist because they said mine was a special case. So I went in, I had my appointment that day. The urologist did the exam and he looked at me and he said, you never know you had anything. And I had a clean checkup. And from there on out, which has been almost 20 years, I've been clean, you know, cancer-free. So I want to publicly thank Hashem because I do believe he healed me. I went a year ago and the doctor said our studies show that after this many years you are cured. We do one more appointment. If it's good, you don't have to come back. So I didn't have to come back. And not only that, but before COVID started, I got to go to Israel last year and I got to put my own note in the wall to thank Hashem for what he did for me. So that was nice to not have that distraction when I began to learn. So I began to learn with Lori and you know, she started teaching me about Shabbos and about the 39 halakhas of Shabbos. And it was nice because she would invite me to her home and our family was able to go there. And I was able to see what a real Shabbos was like, not just trying to practice and read about it, but to go to someone's house and to see that it's not just that you pray these prayers, you do these things. It was like the whole spirit of Shabbos and to see how beautiful it was and to learn about the Parsha and to talk about Torah and to have the, you know, the delicious food and all the things that Shabbos is about. It was just nice to experience it. And then, of course, I had many challenges with it because I'd never done it before. But it was nice because Lori was a good sounding board because I could say, you know, I don't understand how you keep Shabbos. I don't understand how you don't turn lights on and off. And I don't understand how. And she would help me until I really began to have more of a appreciation and a love for Shabbos. So after I thought I'd sort of begun to understand Shabbos, then we started learning about the Yom Tovim. And that was a whole nother challenge in itself. Especially when Pesach came. And I remember after my first Pesach, it was so overwhelming for me that I told Lori, I said, I think this is a sign that I wasn't meant to be Jewish. And she said, no. She said, it's you need to, Hashem wants to see how badly you really want it. So I began to continue to learn, tried to practice. But, you know, there was something kind of like convenient about learning, but not being halakhically required to do certain things. Like, for example, if we had a fast day and I got particularly thirsty or hungry, I could have a drink of water. I could have something to eat. Or if it was, I wake up Shabbos morning and my makeup doesn't look so great, I could fix it before I went to shul. Or if we forgot to turn the light off, I could turn it on because, you know, I wasn't really required to, you know, to have to do that. So here I was in a very comfortable position. We were learning. We were really having appreciation for Judaism, but I wasn't really halakhically required to do it. Then something happened in 2004, right before Pesach. Timing is everything. My husband receives a phone call from the hospital that he's being placed on investigative leave. This is just like a couple hours before the Pesach Seder. And I'm not at liberty to talk about the details, but basically it's centered around a situation in which a drunk grandmother came in with her grandson. She saw my husband's yarmulke and she started spewing anti-Semitic comments. She filed a complaint and he was placed on investigative leave. So you know what my husband was thinking about during the Seder. Anyway, so on the very last day of Pesach, my husband was released from his job. He lost his job. So this was kind of like a moment of truth for us because all of a sudden it was like, my husband needed a job. We had to decide what to do. Were we going to stay in Denver or were we going to go somewhere else? He received a phone call from a hospital back in Ohio that offered him literally twice his salary of what he was making in Denver. We went online to look at what the housing was like. The houses were beautiful. They were big, spacious, big backyards. And we were like, well, you know, we could move back to Ohio. We could have a beautiful house. We'd have a nice salary. Are we going to continue? Or are we just going to like maybe say this isn't for us and we're just going to go back to living life sort of the way it was? But it was also that moment of truth when I had to ask myself, what's really important? And is the most important thing in life, is that to have a lot of money or to have a nice house or for my kids to be able to play sports on Saturday and be sports heroes? Is that really what I want at the end of the day? Or do I want that close, intimate relationship that I prayed for so earnestly earlier in my life? And I realized that the most important thing I wanted was not those other things. I wanted that relationship with Hashem. And so that was when we made the decision, we'll stay in Denver. My husband was offered a job in Colorado Springs. And we realized that what we had, we didn't want to give up, and we wanted to continue. And we didn't just want to be on the periphery, we really wanted to be Jewish. We wanted to be part of the Jewish people. So it was at that point that we made the commitment that we wanted to go through conversion. We contacted our rabbi to let him know that we were ready. And so it was in December of 2004 that we went through formal conversion. And I feel so blessed to be part of the Jewish people. And I would like to close with, well, first of all, let me mention that when we did go through conversion, we went to the mikveh with our two youngest twins. They were then like in first grade. They went, and then the following year, our next older son converted, and then the two older sons decided to be Noahites, to believe in the one true God of Israel, but they are not Jewish. So we had the three children all Jewish, and the other two that remain non-Jewish. But I would like to close with something that was especially meaningful to me. It's from the book of Schiermyer, in 16:19-21. It says, Hashem, my strength, my stronghold, and my refuge on the day of distress. To you, nations will come from the ends of the earth and say, it was all falsehood that our ancestors inherited, futility that has no purpose. Can a man make gods for himself? They are not gods. Therefore, behold, I inform that this time I should let them know of my hand and my strength, and they shall know that my name is Hashem. I'm so blessed to be part of the Jewish people. Thank you so much for hearing my story, and be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it.
Leah, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story with us. I've got a couple of questions in the chat for you.
Okay.
Sherry asked, what happened with your parents?
Okay, with my parents, like I mentioned, it was very difficult for them because, as I pointed out, in Christianity, they teach that if you don't believe in JC, that you're gonna, there's no hope for you, that you're gonna die and burn forever in hell. So obviously they were very concerned about us, and it was very stressful. But in their later years, they both have now passed on, but in their later years, they both had severe dementia. So they didn't remember what happened. I would go to visit them, and they didn't notice I was in their food. They didn't notice that I had to leave on Shabbos. They didn't know they had dementia. And if I could just point out, some people may say, well, that was just my imagination, but I did have a dream a couple of years after my father passed, when he was in the other world, and I asked him if he was happy there. He said, yes, there's lots of singing here. And he said, and I can see now why things were the way they were. So that was comforting to me.
Wow, that's powerful. Someone asked, how about your husband's family?
My husband's family?
Yeah.
Well, my husband, both his parents have also passed on, but my husband was one of 14 children. He grew up a good Catholic boy, and then he converted. He was more like a Baptist, when I met him, we got married, but he was one of 14, and many of his siblings are of different faiths. Like, they're not all Baptists. So his parents they're not all Catholic. So his parents had kind of gotten used to the idea that all the siblings kind of went different paths. So, and he's not, to be honest, he's not that close with them. He does talk to like a couple of his older brothers, but you know, they're kind of okay with it because they weren't that close to begin with.
Leah, if you look in the chat, you have a friend here. It says, whoops, I knew Leah and was at her Orthodox wedding. This is from Evie. This is a friend of yours. I knew Leah and was at her Orthodox kosher wedding in Denver. Please tell her I say hi and I miss her very much. From Evie.
From Amy?
No, Evie. It's in your chat.
Evie,
Oh,
Evie.
Oh, Abby, yes. Oh, that's so nice. Thank you.
I also, Leah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, my name is Chana Ahrensweig. My husband and I stayed with you. It's probably been maybe 8 or 9 years ago. We were originally from Atlanta. We stayed with you.
I think I remember that, yes.
Yeah, we borrowed some camping equipment from you. Remember, we went camping in Colorado. Yes. Thank you for your wonderful story. Thank you.
Well, thank you for showing up. Yes.
Okay, I'm going to open it up to anybody. If you have any questions for Leah, feel free to unmute and ask now.
How does she get along with her Noahide sons and the other siblings that are Jewish? How do they all get along together? How does it work?
So that's a good question. My two older sons that are Noahides, they live in the Denver area, so that's nice. So we do get to see them. And then my three other children who are Jewish, two of them are married with families. They live on the East Coast. And then I have my youngest son is not married yet. They all live on the East Coast. So whenever they come in for the holidays, then the non-Jewish sons usually come, you know, just to spend some time with them to see them. But basically, you know, I have my time with my sons here in Denver, and then I plan to fly to the East Coast to see my other kids periodically. So.
Do you have any urge to convert others? This is from Yapa.
Do I have any urge to convert others?
Question from Yapa. Yeah.
Just a minute. Any urge to convert others? Not really, because I don't know that. I think I was taught that we're not really supposed to do that unless someone, like if someone is on the path, and then yes, I'd like to encourage them. And I think that we have a lot of things we can relate to, but I would not necessarily try to convert someone unless they really, you know, are interested themselves. In fact, that was one of the bits of advice that we were given from our rabbi when it applied to our sons. He said, you know, if our older sons get up one day and say they don't want to go to shul, then we shouldn't be really forcing them to go.
Okay, I've got a couple of
I just want to
questions.
say hi. Can I say hi to Leah? It's Evie.
Hi, Abby.
Hi, Leah. How are you?
Good.
That was wonderful. I enjoyed it very much.
Thank you for showing up. I miss you.
I wouldn't miss it.
Thank you.
You look great.
Thank you.
When this whole virus is over, you'll come to Israel and visit.
Actually, my husband and I are looking at trying to come this summer, so hopefully, please God, it'll open up by then.
Great.
Do you have grandchildren? Leah, do you have grandchildren?
I do, yes.
Thank God, Baruch Hashem.
Yes, we have Jewish grandchildren. And also
Wonderful.
one of my sons that lives in Denver has a little girl. And then I have, that's a story in itself, how they met and whatever. But my daughter, the one that was a twin, she worked in a Jewish day school, and she married another teacher there. And they have a really cute little girl who's 7 months old. And then I have another son who's married, and they have 3 children, 2 girls and a boy. So yes, we're very blessed in Lanahar.
Baruch Hashem.
Shoshana, is it okay? I'm sorry.
One at a time, please. Go ahead, Danielle.
I just wanted to ask, I'm coming from a bit of a different perspective. I became a Partners in Torah with somebody who has very little background. She went through the quote unquote Reform Jewish, Sunday school. And I wanted to know, she is a spiritually sensitive person. She wants to increase her awareness of Hashem. She's totally non-observant in any fashion, but she did want to become a partner in Torah. And what what resources coming from a different perspective you might be able to suggest?
That's a good question. Is she interested in being more observant?
I don't know, but for now she has an interest, so at least there's an opening, at least for her to identify as being Jewish and want to seek something. There's an opening, and I don't know where that will take her, but Baruch Hashem, she identifies herself as Jewish, which she is, and the question is really, where to take her, if you have an idea about where to take her from here.
I think I would probably talk to her about what she's most interested in, because sometimes people tend to thrive on, some people find learning Parsha to be very stimulating. Some people might find practical aspects of Judaism as far as keeping Shabbos or, whatever she's particularly interested in. I think that's the route I would probably go, because that's what she's probably going to thrive the most from.
Thank you.
Somebody asked, Shirley asked if you're still in touch with Kathy.
Oh, not as much as I would like to, but actually, the last time I saw her, my husband and I went to Ohio. I had a speaking engagement there, and we were able to see her, and it was just kind of nice. One of her sons was really good friends with one of my sons, and he was married and had kids, and so it was kind of nice to see them. That's probably been about 5 years ago. That's the last time I saw her.
Wonderful. Any more questions, ladies?
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead.
I wrote it in the chat, and I want to ask about the non-Jewish sons, if they lived in the family in the younger years when you became Jewish and they didn't. Were they living in your same house, and how did you manage? And also, at what point did you go through Brit Milah with the boys?
And at what was that last part?
Going through Brit Milah with your sons. At what point was that?
Okay, I didn't understand the first part, but I'll answer I didn't understand the last part. I'll answer the first part, and then we'll go back to the other part. The point when we went through formal conversion, my oldest son was already in college, and he had already moved out, and my second son was in high school. So he was still living at home. Now, when we first started learning about Judaism, all my kids were kind of on the same track. They were all interested, they were all learning. But then I think that my older kids, they realized that it was going to be a big commitment. It wasn't like they started the advantage my 3 kids that did convert had was that they started when they were very young. And they had friends who were Jewish. They played with friends, they went to Jewish school, so they had that background. My 2 older sons, because they were older when we started this path, they didn't have that advantage. So they didn't have Jewish friends. They weren't in a Jewish day school. It made all the difference in the world. And so once we converted, like I said, my one son was already out of the house, and the second son, he obviously had to be considerate of the kashrut laws and those sort of things, but it wasn't long before he too moved out of the house to go to school.
Okay, I was wondering, coping was the challenge. I was thinking coping with that mixed situation was the challenge. So that's why I was asking about how coping with the challenge. The other question is, at what point did the younger ones have a bris?
Oh, okay. So the way that worked was my husband and I went to the mikvah. Our twins also went. At the time, they were about 6 years old. They went ahead and gave my son a bris at that time. He'd had, the bris in the hospital, but the Jewish bris, he had 6. And then they said that if they were interested in continuing on the path, then once my son reached bar mitzvah age, nothing else had to be done. He just would, make the statement that he was still interested. If he wasn't interested at bar mitzvah age, then it was as though, it was null and void, but he was interested, thank God. And, it's very sweet because, my husband, my son, the twin, is now in yeshiva learning. And he told me a few years ago, he said, Mom, there's things I really enjoy. He said, I like sports, I like other things, but he said, the learning of Torah is so sweet. He says, I can't even describe it. He said, it's just so sweet and so special. And it's like, now he's in yeshiva and he said he wants to learn Torah as long as he can. He loves it. So it's very nice. So yeah, he had his bris at 6, and then his older brother, who went through conversion the next year, he had his bris when he was 13.
Okay.
Wow. That's amazing.
I just wanted to make a comment that I am amazed at your integrity and the fact that you're willing to bare your soul to people, not just us. I hear you do it over and over, and this requires such strength of character. You are such a pure neshama that I want to meet you when you come here. Please make yourself available to us.
Love that. I'd love to come to Israel again. I went last year with, there was a group from here called Ace Destiny, and I went with them, and it was the best trip of it was one of the best experiences of my life. I've been to Israel before, but this was the best trip I'd ever had.
When you come again to Israel, make a point to maybe make an appointment with the OU Center, and you can speak at the OU Center, and everybody would come.
Really?
Yes, yes, yes.
And
Are you still in contact with Lori?
I'm sorry, what?
Are you still in contact with Lori Plotnick?
Yes, I am. Yes.
She lives in Denver now or California?
Oh, no, she made Aliyah.
He lives in
Aliyah.
Israel.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm behind the times.
Yeah, I did go to see her when I came last year. I went to her apartment, and she showed me how there was an apartment above her that she said she would really like for me to move into.
Where does she live?
She lives in the old city, not far from the H building.
Oh,
Probably
lovely.
H building.
I was just wondering if you ever did any research into your family to find out if you have any Jewish background, really. You might have some Jewish ancestors.
Actually, it's interesting that you say that because when I went back to Oklahoma, when my mom passed away, I was told that my grandparents, I believe on my mother's side, owned a bakery on the Lower East Side in New York. And their last name was, just a minute. It was a name that I didn't know what it meant until my husband told me, but it was sort of a Jewish name. So I don't know. You know.
Your mother might have been Jewish.
Do you know the name? Can you remember the name? Because I knew the Lower East Side very well. I studied there in high school for 4 years.
Okay, just a second. It was, I know what it was. It was kiker. And I didn't know what a kike was. And when I came back and I was telling my husband about it, he says, do you know what a kike is? And I said, no. I guess that's a derogative term for
It's
a
a
Jew.
derogative term for a Jew. Yes.
Right, I didn't know that. And their last name was Kiker. And then apparently they owned a bakery in New York.
Wow.
So if you thought you could try look into that because
I
you
was
might have
gonna
been
say
Jewish
that.
by birth.
You
If
can
your
find their birth certificates. You can apply for their birth certificates. Wherever they were born, you can apply for them, and probably your grandparents and great-grandparents as well. And look into it that way and see where they joined or where they were part of the community.
Right.
That
And
happened.
have record.
Maybe you don't want to open up a Pandora's box. You're happy where you are. I think you should just be happy.
It doesn't affect it. She just will find out for sure. Maybe her oldest sons are Jewish. They don't know it.
Okay, well, that's going to be ladies, I want to thank you very much. And Leah, I can't thank you enough. Really, it was truly inspiring. And I want to thank you for opening your heart to us. I don't have the words, really. Thank you so, so much. And
Thank you.
you've given a lot of people a lot of inspiration. I really mean that. So thank you very much. And just to let you know, ladies, next week, Mitzvah Shem, we have Mrs. Rachel Factor, who was born in Honolulu. I will send out a bio on her. She was a Broadway actress, a dancer with the Rockettes. I will send out the bio on her, and she will
Wow.
share with us her story next week, Mitzvah Shem. So thank you again, Leah. Thank you, ladies, and Mr. Shem, we'll see you next week, same time. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so
God
much.
bless you. Thank you so much for